Hello everyone, you're very welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing what is a very controversial topic in Irish society: landlords and the Irish rental market. Now let me preface this entire video with a unanimous agreement. We can all agree that the Irish rental market is shambolic. There's no two ways about it. The data shows that Ireland's rental market has become exceedingly unaffordable since 2010. In fact, average rents in Ireland have increased by more than 82% over the past 12 years, compared to the EU average of 18%. According to the Banking and Payments Federation of Ireland, much of that has to do with the fact that Ireland's population between 2011 and 2022 increased by over 500,000 people, while total housing output during the same period only grew by 130,000 units. In other words, there hasn't been enough supply to meet demand. The same story that you've heard for many years now. The point of this video is not to labor on the fact that the Irish rental market is broken. We all know it is. Nor is the point of this video to highlight that Ireland's housing supply is highly inadequate relative to demand. We've heard it all before. Rather, the point of this video is to examine the seemingly popular notion in Irish society that landlords are the villain in this story. Let's not beat around the bush. The status of landlord is met with great animosity anytime it happens to surface in Irish discourse. In fact, the word landlord itself has negative connotations, implying that the person to whom you pay your rent is a lord of sorts. Naturally, that doesn't sit well with many renters. Make no mistake about it, I fully understand the multitude of reasons as to why any given renter could have a negative disposition towards their landlord and or landlords as a whole. Many renters have had genuine bad experiences from renting, and those bad experiences, depending on their severity and frequency, can leave a sour taste in the renter's mouth. I believe that the single most common and unified reason as to why landlords are disliked is the cost of rent, and the impact that this cost is having on the standard of living of renters. From the renter's perspective, it's the landlord who is reaping the rewards of this broken rental market, while it's the renter who is struggling to make ends meet as a result. Why would the renter show any sympathy or admiration towards the landlord in such a situation? It's this us versus them mentality which has resulted in landlords falling significantly out of favor within Irish society. So for the next while, all in the name of healthy debate, I want to challenge this notion that all landlords are inherently a force of evil. My aim is to highlight the realities of landlordship in Ireland, and by doing so, I hope to offer up an alternative and less discussed perspective on the topic. I would ask that you try to keep an open mind on this. You don't have to agree with everything that's being said, but at least try to hear the other side of the story with some degree of objectivity. Feel free to share your perspective on this topic in the comment section as much as you want. Just try to keep it respectful. So the first thing I want to discuss is landlord sentiment. How do landlords feel about being landlords in 2023? The data would suggest that landlord sentiment is becoming increasingly negative. According to the Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland, 40% of residential property sales in the final 3 months of 2022 were landlords selling their properties. One could argue that much of these sales were likely made to lock in property valuation gains, which came from the appreciation in Irish house prices experienced between 2020 and 2022. There is a relative degree of uncertainty with regards to the future of Irish house prices, especially with rising interest rates and high inflation. So it's not surprising in that context that many landlords who made significant gains over the past 2 years are now deciding to get out while the going is good. However, that alone does not allude to negative sentiment, just a desire to realize gains. It's only when we look at data from the Residential Tenancies Board that we start to paint a picture. According to a recent survey from the RTB, 18% of landlords said that they were likely or very likely to sell their properties within the next 2 years. Of the landlords who are selling, when questioned on why they're selling, 48% said they no longer wish to be a landlord, indicating a full exit from the market. 45% said that the taxation of rental income is too high. 43% said that being a landlord is not profitable. 36% said that the regulatory environment was a factor, which can be taken to mean that the regulatory environment is too burdensome. 26% said they were retiring. 24% said that their property was no longer in negative equity, and 22% said that too much time is needed to manage properties. This begs the question, how could landlord sentiment be negative at a time when rents are seemingly at record highs? To answer this question, we first have to make one thing abundantly clear. A rental property is an investment first and foremost. Failure to understand and accept this one fact on the part of the renter can lead to irrational resentment towards the landlord. If you can't accept that a rental property is an investment, and if you don't understand the implications of that fact, namely the pursuit of profit, then you'll never be able to see the bigger picture. A landlord is just a normal investor who decided to purchase a property instead of stocks. We congratulate those who start saving and investing for retirement in their 20s, or those who have a knack for stock market investing. In both cases, you have individuals who are using their money to make investments in the hope of generating a decent investment return. But when the same individual chooses property as their investment of choice, all of a sudden they're met with animosity, despite having the exact same goals as other investors. This makes no sense. What's the difference between an investor who puts 100 grand into stocks and an investor who puts 100 grand into property? Why is the latter subject to endless bombardment while the former is rarely talked about? Well, the answer is obvious. With rental properties, you have tenants, real people with real lives, real jobs, and real problems. Investing in stocks isn't as personal as investing in property, and it's this personal element that I believe is responsible for the dissociation between landlord and investor, despite them being the exact same thing. If we can't accept that a landlord is an investor, then we won't be able to accept that actions taken by the landlord, namely increasing rent or selling the property, are taken solely in the name of investment returns. In 99.9% of cases, there is nothing personal about it. If a landlord, as an investor, does not make investment decisions which serve his or her best interests, then he or she is a bad investor. The main reasons why anyone decides to invest in residential property is because A, they believe that the property will increase in value over time, B, they believe that they can generate income by renting the property, and C, most importantly, they believe that the total return generated by both A and B will be more favorable than what other investments could provide. If point C turns out to be false, in other words, a more favorable investment exists elsewhere, there is little to no reason for the investor to stick with their property investment. With the context of a rental property being an investment first and foremost, we can now discuss why landlord sentiment is negative at a time when rents are seemingly at record highs. If you want the one-liner, here it is. After-tax total returns from property rentals in Ireland aren't good enough. They aren't good enough to justify the additional workload associated with being a property investor as compared to, say, a stock market investor. But most importantly, opportunities for higher total returns after tax exist elsewhere. And as we explained just moments ago, this is what matters most to investors. So naturally, we have to ask ourselves, why aren't after-tax total returns from property rentals in Ireland good enough? As was largely covered in a recent Irish Times article, it boils down to 5 reasons. As we go through this list, keep in mind that what we're concerned about here is the unattractiveness of Irish property as an investment and how this is weighing on landlord sentiment. Reason 1, rent pressure zones. The rules associated with rental properties existing within rent pressure zones effectively limit the income growth that a landlord can expect from his or her property. Under these rules, rents can't increase at a rate that is greater than the rate of general inflation, subject to a maximum increase of 2% per year. In effect, this means that a landlord can't increase rents by more than 2% per year, even if inflation is much higher than 2%. Why is that a problem? Say a landlord receives €1,400 per month in gross rent from their tenants. Now say that over the course of the next year, general inflation runs at 4%. If the landlord doesn't increase the rent by at least 4% or €56 per month, the real value of their rental income will fall. If the property in question in this example was a property in a rent pressure zone, the landlord would only be able to increase the rent by 2% or €28 per month. So even though the landlord is collecting 2% 2% more rent, their real return has actually fallen by 2% because inflation is at 4%. One of the biggest appeals of property investing is that it's meant to be a great hedge against inflation because property prices and rents tend to increase in line with inflation. But if there's a limit on how much your rental income can grow in any one year, then all of a sudden it becomes a less attractive proposition, especially in times when inflation is high or rising. Rent pressure zones are also a problem for landlords who are charging below market rent. The example given in the Irish Times article is a scenario where one property is getting €1,100 per month and another property across the road is getting €2,000 per month, with assumingly no major differences between the two properties. This is a real problem. The market rent might very well be €2,000 per month, but because the property is in a rent pressure zone, the landlord charging €1,100 per month can only increase the rent by 2%, making it virtually impossible to get to the market rent price. So you could have a scenario where a landlord is receiving well below market rent in a rent pressure zone at a time when inflation is running higher than 2%. As far as income investments go, that's a raw deal. For context, and the context is what matters, any stock market investor could invest in a high quality, dividend paying real estate investment trust with a long history of dividend growth and no limit to that growth. You could make that investment in 5 minutes and you get automatic indirect exposure to property investments with zero effort on your part. This is what direct property investing has to compete with. To make matters worse, if a landlord sells their rent pressure zone property to a new landlord, the new landlord isn't able to charge market rent if the property wasn't previously making market rent. This is why properties in rent pressure zones, which earn less than market rent, aren't attractive investments for prospective property investors. Hence why, as per the RTB survey, 71% of landlord sales of property have been to owner-occupiers and not landlords. This has the very real effect of reducing the number of homes available for rent and increasing the number of homes for sale. Good for buyers, bad for renters. Reason 2, taxation. In Ireland, rental income is taxed at the landlord's marginal rate of income tax plus USC and PRSI. In reality, most landlords are paying at least €48.50 in tax for every €100 of rental income received. Yes, landlords can reduce their tax bills through deductions for allowable expenses, mortgage interest, and capital allowances. However, despite this, many landlords still feel hard done by when it comes to taxes, and I'd be inclined to agree. By comparison, real estate investment trusts like Irish Residential Properties REIT pay zero corporation tax on rental income received from tenants and on gains made from the sale of investment property. But yet landlords are subjected to the same tax rates as the average stock market investor. It makes no sense. At least the landlord is providing a well-needed supply of rental accommodation. The secondary stock market investor is providing nothing, but yet their investment income and gains are taxed at the same rate. Why isn't the government providing better tax incentives for private landlords despite doing so for institutional investors? Surely both have a very important role to play in the eyes of the Exchequer. Until that happens, after-tax total returns for property investors in Ireland will continue to suffer. Reason 3, interest rates. Property investors, just like homeowners, are affected when interest rates go up. Any landlord with a variable rate mortgage on their property is now paying higher monthly mortgage repayments. We don't know how far the European Central Bank is going to go with interest rates. That largely depends on inflation data. But so long as rates continue to rise, so too will mortgage repayments. Higher mortgage repayments equals less profit. So you could be a landlord paying higher mortgage repayments, receiving below market rent in a rent pressure zone at a time when inflation is well above 2%. Any profits that you're left with are then taxed to high heaven while your institutional counterparts pay no tax at all. What a great deal that is. While interest rate risk isn't unique to property investing, it is a fundamentally important factor to consider when assessing the viability of a prospective property investment. Hence why I've included it on the list. Number 4, regulation uncertainty. Let's not beat around the bush. If Sinn Féin gets into government, it likely won't be in the best interests of property investors. As written in the Irish Times, quote, "The party has previously said it will legislate for tenancies of indefinite duration to provide renters real security of tenure." According to Owen O'Brien, housing spokesman for Sinn Féin, in practice this would see the party remove the sale of property as grounds for issuing a notice to quit under Section 34 of the Residential Tenancies Act. In other words, Sinn Féin wants to make it so that a landlord's decision to sell his or her property is not sufficient grounds to request a tenant to vacate the property. What this means is that the landlord could only sell the property to another property investor where a valid tenancy agreement is in place. This suggestion by Sinn Féin, if it were to happen, would be a big problem for landlords. Earlier we talked about how properties in rent pressure zones earning below market rent are unattractive investments, and that's why 71% of surveyed landlord property sales per the RTB are to owner-occupiers, not property investors. Imagine a scenario where that market of 71% falls to 0%. You have to sell to another property investor. But what if there are no property investors who want to buy at the market price? A price that an owner-occupier would be willing to pay for that property. You'd have to either A, not sell the property, or B, sell the property at a loss or a significantly lower gain. The effect of such a policy would be a reduction in the liquidity of the Irish property rental market. Liquidity, in the context of investing, refers to how easy it is for the investor to enter and exit the investment without having to sacrifice on price. Low liquidity is bad news for investors because it increases the likelihood that should you need to exit the investment in a hurry, you won't be able to do so at a fair market price. So again, consider this from the perspective of an investor. Why would you want to invest in a property market with low liquidity and capped income growth? Obviously, at the time of making this video, Sinn Féin aren't in government and such a policy doesn't exist. But many landlords are selling now to realize gains that might not be accessible in the event of a Sinn Féin government. Reason 5, the Residential Tenancies Board. The RTB, despite being an independent body that is, quote, impartial in the exercise of its functions, does have a reputation for favouring tenants over landlords in an open dispute. Talk to enough landlords and you'll likely hear many stories of bad experiences with the RTB, even in circumstances where the landlord is arguably in the right. One such story is referred to by a landlord in the Irish Times, where he says, quote, one particular tenant was a person from a very good background working in stockbroking, but absolutely trashed the house and cost me €15,000. I went to the RTB and they offered me only €1,000, a total joke as I didn't even get the money. Why would you want to invest in the Irish property market if there's a real risk that the regulator might not rule for rightful compensation for damages? Damages which impact total investment returns. Again, that's what matters. The big picture here is that between rent pressure zones, high taxation, rising interest rates, regulation uncertainty, and run-ins with the RTB, the Irish property market doesn't offer sufficient total returns to some landlords to make an investment worthwhile, specifically in comparison to total returns that could be achieved elsewhere with much less stress. That is why landlord sentiment is negative, and that's why some landlords are exiting the Irish property market. The reason why I'm emphasizing that this relates to some and not all landlords is because obviously there are landlords in Ireland who are making and have made attractive total returns from property investing. The point is that they don't represent all landlords, just like how the tiny fraction of successful day traders in the stock market don't represent all day traders. It isn't easy as buy a rental property, collect rent, and get rich. Keep that in mind. So how do we conclude this discussion? Landlords, unlike secondary stock market investors, fulfill a valuable purpose in their quest for investment returns, one that is often devalued and villainized by society. That purpose is the provision of rental accommodation. Although that accommodation is becoming increasingly unaffordable, that is the fault of inadequate government policy, not the fault of landlords. The Irish property market needs landlords. Without them, the rental crisis will only get worse. Landlords need to be properly incentivized in order to keep them invested in the Irish property market. Landlords are just investors, and like all investors, they have options. They can, should, and will act in the best interests of their investment returns. Finally, I believe that the popular notion in Irish society that all landlords are villains is not only unfair and a disconnection from reality, but it also reflects a misunderstanding about the goals of property investing and indeed investing as a whole. If you're someone who has a negative disposition towards landlords simply because they're landlords, consider the following. Why is it that you show such animosity towards an investor who, in their pursuit of profit, is providing providing well-needed rental accommodation in the midst of a housing supply crisis. But yet, you show little to no animosity towards the secondary stock market investor who, in their pursuit of profit, is providing no such value. And there are far more stock market investors than property investors. At least be consistent and say that you dislike all investors universally. But if that's the case, and you're fundamentally against the practice of wealth accumulation, I guess you'll never have a pension or make any personal investments of your own, because that would be hypocritical. Just some food for thought. That's my 2 cents. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, you can show your support by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. If you didn't enjoy this video, I'm sure you'll let me know. Regardless, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.